It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Now, you can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. If you just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Now, if you like our show, be sure and check out our Patreon. You can join Patreon for a small subscription. And all the shows you hear Monday to Friday on AM/FM radio, you can hear over on Patreon with all the commercials and the ads cut out. Plus, I put up exclusive content there. We have shortly coming up Courtney Love's recordings when she was a teenager in juvenile detention. We have those recordings exclusively from her father, Hank Harrison. We also have, I'm going to be putting up all the docs from the Promise software and William Hamilton and all that stuff. I've been lax on that, but I promise I'll get that stuff up. So all that stuff on Patreon, ad-free, you get all that stuff. Our archives you can find at Spreaker.com. Every Friday night, 8 p.m., I do a live show on Spreaker.com. You can find it there. And then there's a chat room. You get an email notification when we put up new content. And I do play repeats and best of classic shows every single day. Now, today's show is really fascinating. Our guest today, Carl Watkins, has never done an interview before. He's working on this book called Memoirs of a CIA Baby. It seems like, I'm not sure if it's his mother or his father, who worked for the CIA, that a front company involved with some senator. And he says he's the living eyewitness to the murder of Jimmy Hoffa. So great content coming up today. Mr. Carl Watkins, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Carl, thank you so much. Now, before we get into Memoirs of a CIA Baby, tell us about yourself. Who's Carl Watkins?
I was born in 1960 in Chicago Heights, Illinois. I was born to my father, Adelbert C. Watkins, Jr., and my mother, Marcia A. Watkins, also. In 1950, my mother states that she was hired by the CIA to be a wordsmith, and she actually reworded reports that came in from overseas that were jumbled. She had a high academic scores in high school and had she went to college with those scores, and during her college, she worked for the CIA doing this.
Didn't you also say, too, that she got a college scholarship from the CIA?
Yep. Yes. Not from the CIA, just from her good grades.
Gotcha.
And they noticed this at the time when she graduated. Her mother was a chief she worked for Time Life magazine.
Oh, okay. And what college did your mom go to?
Let me look at this. You know, she went to let's see. I have a paper she wrote when she was in college. That was something I would have to look up.
That's no big deal. You know what state she went to college in?
Illinois, Chicago.
Okay, Chicago, Illinois. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so your mother, Marcia Watkins, went to college, and the CIA recruited her in college. Go ahead.
My father was Adelbert C. Watkins, Jr. His father was upper management of Wisconsin Steel and International Harvester. My father went to was in the Korean War. And after he got out, he started a landscaping business in 1955, which was just basically himself at the time until 1959. In 1959, my father acquired a silent partner who at the time was in the House of Representatives and in 1964 became a U.S. Senator. In 1959 also, my father recruited men out of the Juvenile Detention Center, which later became known as the Blackstone Rangers. In 1960, my dad started cutting all the grass along the Illinois state highways, and the Blackstone Rangers worked as the crew that cut the grass on the highways. I knew these men until I left Chicago.
And who was the senator?
It was U.S. Senator Walter Hofffelter.
Hofffelter. So when did you first become aware that your parents were CIA? Were both parents CIA or just one?
Well, my father was actually somehow attached to the Navy all these years, because after we left Chicago and he was very sick, he always complained that they never gave him his full military retirement because they cut all ties with him. But I actually, on Father's Day of 1975, I helped my father save the life of a CIA agent. And this is when I was read into what they were doing.
Okay, so what were the circumstances around that? 1975, you said?
Yes, June 15th of 1975.
So you had to be about 17, 18 years old, right?
I was 15.
15, really? Good, 75? Yeah, you're 2 years younger than me. No, yeah, you're 2 years older than me. And 75, you were only... Okay. Maybe I can't do the math. Okay.
So, I was born in 1960, and in 1975, I was 15.
Really? Okay, because I'm 62. Anyway, listen, I can't do the math. Okay, let's put it that way. Okay. And I never said I was going to do math on the show. So what were the circumstances around that?
My father's business had to pay protection to the Chicago outfit. A man... The boss, whose name was Albert Taco. He was a mafia boss of the south side of Chicago. These men, the CIA agent, had stolen 20,000 cartons of cigarettes from a warehouse in downtown Chicago. He was using these cigarettes to convert a Russian spy at the time. Taco and his henchmen found this man and had him in a basement of a house in Calumet City. They were beating him to death and they were going to kill him. And right before they killed him, he cried out my father's name, which really surprised these men. So my father received a phone call and said he needed me to go with him and help him. There was an argument between Albert Taco and my father when we arrived. A man was duct taped to a chair and beaten very badly. My father handed me a little penknife to cut this man loose from the chair. Well, I cut this man loose from the chair. One of the henchmen held a shotgun towards me and that man, waiting for Taco to tell him to kill us. The other man was standing beside my father and Albert Taco, who was a very big man, and it was a very tense situation. My father argued with Taco and told him that the protection we paid umbrellaed this man to our safety, and he told Taco that he could not kill this man. Taco wanted $100,000, and my dad told him it's too bad. It's the price of doing business. Since my dad was probably pretty mad that he had to pay protection to Taco all those years anyway. We were able to take this man out and get him to a safe house in Blue Island, Illinois. How I think they were just so unbelieved that my father would know anybody in the CIA at the time. They were dumbfounded, is the word I could say. Well, they let us go at that time.
Now, did your father have $100,000 in this landscaping business that in 1975? No.
No. This was money that Albert Taco thought was owed to him because the CIA agent stole all the cigarettes. That's what he valued, the cigarettes of the CIA agent who stole them.
Gotcha.
And that was it for a while. We were like I can't say that word, but we were in danger from that day on. My family, my father, and so that was about it with that incident itself. And then about 2 or 3 weeks later, my grandfather showed up with Jimmy Hoffa, who really had bad timing. And Jimmy Hoffa wanted to meet with the bosses of Chicago. One thing you got to know about my father was if anybody wanted to meet another businessman or two businessmen wanted to get connected together for reasons, they could go to my father and my father could set up meetings between these men. He knew all the big corporation people of Chicago, the steel companies, UPS, actually Waste Management, which was not really Waste Management at the time, but all those garbage trucks were controlled by Albert Taco. So Jimmy Hoffa somehow found out that if he could talk to my dad, he could get a meeting set up. My dad, I was there that day. My dad didn't want to set up any meeting for him. He told him, no, you're making a mistake. But then my dad finally agreed to do that. And then, of course, on July 30th, 1975, my father was made to get into a limousine it was around 9:30 in the morning. He said he was going to lunch. The limousine was owned by Albert Taco. He told me to pick him up, to be at the Glenwood Lansing Municipal Airport at 5:30 that evening to pick him up. Now, one thing that people don't understand is I was 15 and didn't have a driver's license, but I was driving from a young age back in the day. So I was able to drive with no problems. I went to the airport, and I sat there for quite a long time. I had to park next to a cargo plane. The two men that were in the previous incident with the CIA agent were in this plane, and they waved me over.
Did you mention the name of that CIA agent previous to this when you were talking to me?
I don't know his name.
You don't know the name of the CIA agent, okay.
I can pretty much remember somewhat of what he looked like. He was a very tall, thin man.
And how did you know he was CIA?
My father told me on the way home from that day that everything he did for our national security. And then when we got home, my mother and father told me what was going on with the business. And their main objectives in the business was to find and identify Russian and communist spies in the Chicagoland area. The Blackstone Rangers were also used to help us identify anybody who was out of place in their neighborhoods also.
Okay.
So when I went over to this plane, it had a drop down in the back with a cargo plane where you could have probably drove a forklift with stuff on it. When I walked onto the plane, I was astonished to see the inside of this plane. It was all blue plush carpeting, walls, mirrors, and there was a stripper pole in the middle of it.
Really?
Yes. It was like, so when you first walk onto this plane, you're astonished. And then one of the men came around from one of the partitions, and another man came from behind me, like they were going to do something to me. And I looked down, and there was a loose carpet. And I knew these men all my life. And I said, "What's going on here?" They said, "Why you got a loose carpet down here?" I was naive because I was still only 15 years old at this time. And they said, "Oh, we're just doing some remodeling." So then one of them seen the car coming around from the corner and told me to go back to the truck. So I went back to my dad's truck and sat in the truck waiting for him. Limousine pulled up, and 4 men got out. Albert Taco, my father, Jimmy Hoffa, and I still don't know who the other man was. Another mafia boss, I'm sure, but I haven't been able to remember his face because I was mostly looking at my father.
Now, Carl, let me just stop you one more time. I hate to keep interrupting you, but how did you know who Jimmy Hoffa was? You're only 15 years old, you know. How did you know?
Well, after that day he showed up, my father, of course, he came in the house and had drinks. And even my sister remembers, she doesn't remember the timeline, but she remembers Jimmy Hoffa coming over. Of course, Jimmy Hoffa was always in the news anyway.
Okay.
So we knew who he was, and no mistaking who he was.
Okay.
So when they all entered the back of that plane, and my father almost was immediately like shoved out of the plane and sort of stumbled off of that ramp and ran to the truck. He said, they just killed that man in front of me. I did not see Jimmy Hoffa get killed, but I did see the plane rumbling around like there was a fight going on. We raced home because my father wanted to make sure my mother was not in any danger. We got home and we waited and we hid. Our business was connected to our home. And we all hid in our shop. I had a couple hunting rifles that we had with us in the shop in case they were going to come to harm us in any way, which they did not. We watched the limousine drive past our road on Glenwood Dyer Road. And that's pretty much what I know about what happened that day. And that was between 6 and 6:30 in the evening. Now, I did a little homework and I looked up to see if this was any way could have happened, and according to the highway records, that Glenwood Lansing Airport was a 4-hour drive from the restaurant in Michigan where Jimmy Hoffa disappeared. Red Fox. I believe my father was the man in the car that Jimmy Hoffa felt comfortable with getting in that car. They then most likely switched cars. This is my thinking of what happened. And they switched cars into the limousine somewhere else.
Well, Carl, did you ever discuss this with your dad and say, hey, Dad, what happened that day with Jimmy Hoffa?
Yeah. It's exactly what I'm telling you, too.
Okay.
And for a couple years after that, I hounded the one man trying to find out what they did with Jimmy Hoffa's body. He came up with different stories, which another thing I haven't told you was when I was 11 or 12, I started cutting the lawns of Tony Accardo and Albert Taco's home where they lived. I knew Accardo as his child, who basically was friends with my grandfather and my mother's father. And then when I was 12 in 72, my grandfather died, and that's when I first met Tony Accardo.
And what did Tony Accardo have to tell you? Did I lose you?
No, I'm here. He didn't tell me anything. He was like out of the picture at the time. I never was able to ask him anything. But, Albert Taco, I ended up becoming closer to him, but I never really brought it up. I was always too scared because other things happened the years after that with me and Albert Taco.
Okay, like what?
In the summer of 77, a man who was, I believe, was part of the Southern Mafia, who controlled the town of Sauk Village, which was a suburb of Chicago. His name was Bobby Joe Garmany. A neighbor told us, I worked for Bobby Joe Garmany one summer in '76. He had a hay baling company. My father couldn't afford to pay me that year, and so I went to work baling hay. Then a neighbor got me that job. This neighbor also told me and my best friend about $10 million in counterfeit money that Bobby Joe Garmany had made and was distributing out of a engine company out of Chicago Heights. When this man found out, he poisoned me. And then my best friend went and shot one of his goons, which were a made man. And I believe after all these men were killed by Albert Taco and his gang, they also killed my best friend because he shot a made man. I can't prove this. I only know it in my heart.
Well, were you ever questioned by the cops in any of these situations? For what you knew?
No. There was no cops you could trust. If you found a good cop, if he said anything to anybody higher up, then the mafia would find out. After this incident, I was offered the town of Sauk Village to run, and I was brought to Bobby Joe Garmany's bar, whatever they were doing. And his sister actually owned this place in Sauk Village. They brought me to her. She was ready to sign over ownership of this bar to me, and I was only 17. My dad told me never to accept anything, and he told me not to accept anything that day before I left. When I got to the bar and they said, this is all yours, you can have it, she's ready to sign the papers over to you, and I told them that she had lost enough. She lost her brother. Let her keep her bar. They weren't too happy about that. So I was brought back home, told my father what had happened. Now, since I wasn't cooperating with them, they wanted to keep me close because of everything I knew. I actually asked my sister, what should I do? They're going to kill me. And she told me to go join the Army. I joined the delayed entry program and became government property. And I did this in order to make sure there was an outside government investigation if I was to be killed. And this deterred them at the time. When I graduated high school in June of '78, the Monday after my graduation, I had a month before I left for boot camp. I left for boot camp on July 5th of '78. Albert Taco's limousine showed up at our business. My dad came and got me, and I had to get in the limousine. I thought I was going to be killed that day. When I entered the limousine, Albert Taco was sitting there, and Sheriff Elrod, the elected sheriff of Cook County, was in there. He was just as scared as I was, so I'm not saying anything bad about Sheriff Elrod. This was a scheme that Albert Taco was trying to use to get me killed. He wanted me to do a drug bust, set up a drug buy so the Cook County Sheriff's Department could make a bust against people who were selling bad drugs in the forest preserves. It was angel dust. A lot of kids were dying from it. They were flying out of windows. I agreed to do this, and Albert Taco says, I'll fund the project. And the sheriff agreed to it because he wanted the bust. I think the sheriff knew what Albert Taco was up to anyway. So I was supplied to make the buy with counterfeit money, of course, which would have gotten me killed. My father made my sister do this with me, who is still alive today and can verify this. So at about 3 o'clock in the morning, somebody knocked at my door before I was to make this, knocked at my bedroom window, actually, to make this buy. He handed me a bag full of money and told me to give him the other money. I actually cracked a joke with him. I said, "Can I keep it?" Because I was pretty young at the time. He goes, "No, give it to me." So he took the counterfeit money and gave me real money so that me and my sister would not get injured in this drug buy. The sheriff and I believe there was federal agencies also that swarmed the forest preserves, and they busted this man and a whole bunch of other people who were controlling the drug sales there, there was a lot of, all the kids in the suburbs went there to buy their drugs. So that was successful, and I ended up going into the Army after this was done, said and done. When I went into the Army in 78, everything seemed to be okay for a while. And January of 79, I was already in Germany, and there was another friend of mine who was, they said he died of a gun cleaning accident, and his girlfriend was upstairs at the time. I believe that he was most likely shot through an open window, and then it was disguised that he was cleaning his gun and shot. Ended up going off. Everybody who went to his funeral, which I wasn't there, said he had pellets on the back of his hand, pellet holes in the back of his hands and everything. So nothing seemed to be what it was. Then in February of 1979, my father had a mysterious heart attack, which was caused by a blood clot. I have his medical records. When he first entered the hospital, there was nothing wrong with his blood, and they couldn't figure out why he had a blood clot. Then, a couple months later, I came home on emergency leave to see him. I went back, and then I was poisoned in a military chow hall. I show a picture on my Facebook page of how the man did it. And in our chow hall in Germany, we had an open campus type army base. They hired German nationals to service our food in the chow hall. And this had been going on for years to give some of the German nationals jobs while we were there. When I was poisoned, I woke up maybe a week or two later in total fever in the basement with an IV bottle hooked to me. And a German girl who didn't speak English was giving me sponge baths and changing the sheets on the bed every couple hours, probably, because I was in such a fever. The poison they used against me was a snake venom. I finally recovered from that. And then I found out they had fired all the German nationals. We had all Army people now serving us food. And then on July 15th of 1979, my sister was hit head-on in a car accident by a semi-truck. I was home on emergency leave again. She survived this crash somehow, and I still take care of her today. Now, whether this was another hit on us or not, I don't know.
Well, what would be the motives for trying to kill you and your sister?
We knew too much. All through the years of everything that was going on. We knew too much information. It was about the murders of Jimmy Hoffa, the murders of Bobby Joe Garmany, his girlfriend, and his two goons or hitmen or whoever they were. And everybody suspected that my one friend was also murdered by them.
Let me ask you a question, Carl. What did you do for a living your entire life?
Well, after I left Chicago, we negotiated our freedom. I ended up working in the state prison in Arizona for 12 years. And then after my mother and father died, my sister and I moved to Nevada, where I worked and retired from the state prison in Carson City. I'm a retired peace officer today.
Gotcha. So then backing up, how did you negotiate your freedom?
We just promised Albert Taco that we would never say anything to let us go, leave us alone. We'll leave the state. You'll never see us again. And he agreed to it. He wanted to loan me the money for my dad to keep the business, but because the business was financially just ruined from teacher strikes and all the steel companies closed up and moved down south to right-to-work states at the time, the economy was really shitty. So we told him, no, we don't want to keep the business. We just want to leave. And he let us leave. In 1986 in Arizona, my father and I and my mother started a volunteer group.
Right.
It was a statewide group, but there was no company in Tucson allowed at the time, and we ended up doing all the security for all the special events of Pima County and Tucson, in the city of Tucson. I have some pictures on my website. This is just to show the character of our family, that who we really were. And when we were doing this, it was the Arizona Rangers Tucson Company. And some of the pictures I show are me standing in between a retired colonel and a retired general of the U.S. Army.
And also, too, you have some information about the attempted assassination of Castro?
That happened in the early 60s. This was told to me by my mom and dad when they told me about everything that was happening when, right before Jimmy Hoffa, right around that time, that all happened.
Okay, so what did they tell you?
My father was given a single ingredient and a recipe to have pills made. These were given to him. I'm not sure if they were given to him by the senator or somebody that they all knew somehow. So I don't know exactly who did this. And we were related to a pharmacist who made the pills. And this is how really my father got involved with the Chicago outfit. Was he took them to Tony Accardo and negotiated the hit on Castro through them. He said he represented all the big businesses in Chicago. He knew all the steel companies. He knew the owner of a major airline that still exists today, UPS. He worked for that man, knew that man. So it was viable that he could have been a liaison for these companies. So Tony Accardo agreed, and Johnny Roselli was part of that deal to try and get the pills to Cuba somehow, to the man who delivered the coffee beans to Castro's palace or whatever, wherever he kept himself. And this man was also the coffee bean deliverer for the casinos when the mafia was there. That's how the mafia knew this man. Right away, Castro found that this man was in contact with the Chicago mafia and executed him. So this was dead in the water pretty quickly after they started it. My dad tried to retrieve the pills, but Tony Accardo held on to them and would not give them back. My relative, who was the pharmacist, was stabbed on the same pier that Johnny Roselli was murdered on. And people were running down the pier to see what the commotion was. And they took Johnny Roselli in a boat, and they left my relative for dead because he was bleeding to death. The people who arrived at the scene helped save my relative's life and got him to a hospital where he survived. He was not messed with again after that.
Do you have any other stories you want to share?
Not at this time. Once I do publish my book, and I guess we can find out more then.
Well, what's delaying the publication of the book?
Funding. I've gotten a lot of fly-by-night people that want to do this or do that, but I am looking for the right publisher to publish my memoirs. So I've held off from that, and I don't know what the government's going to do, if anything, about my story.
Well, the book's completely written now?
Yeah, in one form, but, my sister read it, and she told me I should write 20 short stories out of it. So I'm going to start writing, and I can see 10 of them, 10 stories in there that I could write about. So I'm not sure on which way I want to go with it either. I've never written a book or anything, so I get confused on what really I should do with it.
Now, from also, too, looking at your Facebook page, Memoirs of a CIA Baby, it says that some of this stuff may lead to the assassination of JFK?
Well, the thing that gets me is if there was some type of assassination attempt against Castro, does my story have anything to do that I don't know about, have anything to do with any other assassinations? I don't know. I've been trying to find out. I've been looking at pictures all over the internet to try and figure out this or that. I've been looking things up.
Now, it says also, too, you have your mother's diary.
What now? I'm sorry.
You mentioned, too, you have your mother's diary that describes her being recruited by the CIA. What else is in your mother's diary?
Pretty much that's like at the end of her diaries, her younger diaries are just of, personal, like boyfriends or whatever else.
Yeah.
My grandfather and all his brothers, her father, supposedly were good friends with Al Capone and Lucky Luciano, and they drove beer trucks for Al Capone. But, I have a picture of these guys, and I can't find them in any pictures with Al Capone. Supposedly, two of my great uncles married into the Capone family, but I can't find any proof of that. So I really can't say that it's true or not true.
I noticed, too, on your Facebook, you're disgruntled about some of the JFK groups, Facebook groups. But what about, like, the Al Capone groups and the outfit, the Chicago outfit groups? How have they received your story?
None of them really have commented to me on anything. I just recently put on my personal page that's not of public knowledge, which you are a friend to.
Mm.
I asked a lot of people that I grew up with if they believed that I was an eyewitness to the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. My father's sister responded to that.
And what'd she say?
She just gave me, I just asked for a thumbs up.
Mm-hmm.
And she gave me a thumbs up, and a bunch of other people that are important to how weird it was that when I was growing up. You know, it was, there was a lot of racial things when I was growing up that, you know, we had the Blackstone Rangers working for us. My dad would do business with anybody of any color. We were not prejudiced against anybody. We always did business with everybody. Didn't matter of race or color or anything. And we were looked down upon for this by a lot of people in the immediate area of where we were.
No, yeah, it was definitely a lot of racism back in those days, yeah. Well, we only got about a minute left. Is there anything else you'd like to leave us with?
No, I'm trying to, the only thing is I'm trying to tell the truth and nothing but the truth as far as what I know about it.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like, you know, we've been talking to Carl Watkins, and the book is called Memoirs of a CIA Baby. And you don't seem to be like a sensationalist, you know what I mean? You don't seem to be like some of these characters I meet, you know, interviewing people. You know, you kind of wonder about their stories. They're very hyperbolic, you know, they sensationalize their stories. And you don't seem to have that at all. You seem very matter of fact about the whole thing.
I'm trying, you know.
Yeah.
I'm just telling the way I grew up. I mean, it was weird. I wouldn't change it for anything, though.
Have you ever talked to Ted Rubenstein?
No.
Yeah, he's really into all this. He's a very legitimate guy. He worked with Mae Brussels and Dave Emery and the Larry Flint publications, expert on the JFK assassination, and he's really into this organized crime stuff, too. So he's really into all these mobsters. I'm going to see if I want to put him in touch with you. Would you like that?
Yeah, sure. You could give him my phone number.
Okay, great. Listen, Carl Watkins, and the book is called Memoirs of a CIA Baby. I'd love to see this thing published and get out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Good night.
Thank you very much.
Good night, sir.
Good night now.
Bye.